Welcome. I'll introduce us again. Welcome to the Startup Webinar Series, CI CID Best Practices, Streamlining Your Pipeline. Today we have with us Kelly. He's the man. And Kelly, who are you?
I'm Kelly Ferrone. I work as the Senior Platform Engineer at DuploCloud, and I work on building the integrations between many tools. And I help onboarding customers. So I work with many of our customers to get them migrated onto Duplo. And I've been doing DevOps for about 15 years now. I'm happy to talk about it. It's my favorite subject.
A fellow nerd. That's a good amount of time. I'm Cameron McDougall. I'm the technical marketing engineer at DuploCloud. So I'm DevOps, and I've been doing that for about 5 years, doing consulting, working on platform teams and stuff. And I'm your host today. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we do that, we've got our next up in our series. The next webinar is going to be with Venkat, our CEO. He's awesome. He's a very, very smart guy as well. And that's going to be a great webinar. And then Zafar will be back to finish us off. He was our first in our webinar series. So make sure that you're there. It's going to be a good time. And on to today's agenda. Before we do that, there is a chat. So I want to see everybody active in the chat. Pretend this is a live stream. Throw us all of your compliments, how great we look, how good space is. Any roasts, we welcome that too. Any questions, comments. There's also a Q&A feature on the right side, whichever way that is. It's mirrored. I don't know which way it goes. But if you want questions, we'll address those at the end in the Q&A. So ask those there or in the chat, or shout them really loud. We'll try to hear you. And on to today's agenda. So we're going to be going into a couple different topics. Why is there a slash in CI/CD? We're going to get into some role semantics, a very hot topic of debate, how to address your current project structure, and then best practices and alternatives to custom solutions. So really good CI/CD content from an expert in the field. So Kelly, on to you. Why is there a slash in CI/CD?
So it really just comes down to there's the CI, the continuous integration, and that's all the non-deployment. And then the CD is continuous deployment. So everything that happens before CD and the deployment is like you're building, testing, packaging, and all. And it's really not about the tools. It's about what you're doing at the moment. So if you're running, let's say, some automated tests, you're doing continuous integration, or building a package, that would be continuous integration. And then you have the continuous deployment, which is obviously matching up an environment to some deployer to update your running code in that environment to get your new features. So the most popular tools are like GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. They are all your CI and CD tools. And most of the time when you see a CD tool, it is just a CD tool, but you will not often see just a CI tool. So in the end, it's not about the tools, it's about what you're doing. And you can do continuous deployment with all of them. But as of late, with the idea of GitOps, Argo, Flux, and even CloudFormation now can be considered full-blown CD tools that are continuously deploying and watching your application. And then before all that happens, you'll have your CI, which is, as I said, running tests, scans, building packages and all. So it's really about what you're doing, not the tool you're using.
And so a question, if we're talking about GitOps and CloudFormation and stuff, AWS killed off code commit. So how's that working now?
So CloudFormation, as of last AWS reInvent, released a feature for Git operations. And it connects to any random Git repository, and it has their built-in integration with the popular ones like GitHub, GitLab. And really, it's just a feature that'll watch for new commits and then on a repo, and then continuously run your CloudFormation templates against code that you have committed in that project. So it works very much like Argo or Flux, which are watching more for like Customize and Helm in a Kubernetes environment. And then CloudFormation can kind of be like an IAC runner for your rest of your stack. So HashiCorp has their own version of that called HCP as well for CD. And really, CD is just like your infrastructure as code runner, right? That's watching a repo. So that it's just constantly running your deployments from your IAC.
Gotcha. So yeah, there was a lot of to do about killing off code commit. Anytime any feature gets killed off, there's a lot of what's the word for it? Just a lot of talk about it. So I guess it turned out all right then in the end.
Yeah, not many people used code commit. And it's hard to compete with GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket. They're really the top. Like I call them the big three. Kind of like there's AWS, GCP, and Azure, right? They're the big three. It's what everybody's using.
Yeah, I mean, that's the funny part of it. You know, a lot of people are complaining about it. I used it once, and that was enough. So, well, let's go on to the role semantics.
Yeah. So about some role semantics, like as a discretionary, these are not hard definitions, and I consider these more like roles than titles. So you'll probably be doing them different versions of these throughout the day. And if you're one, you've probably done them all. So just to start, since I'm a platform engineer, and that's what my title is, I see platform engineering as really software engineering, and it is about writing code and making features and by building products. For example, your internal DevOps platforms. Like if you're building some internal development tool, that would be platform engineering because you're engineering platform, right? And it also covers a lot of like the creation of CI CD tools. Like if you're building a CLI or you're creating a brand new GitHub action, that is the engineering of a platform right there. And that's where it kind of moves into DevOps, where DevOps at its core is an operations subject. It is that's what the ops is, your developer operations. And this is about the automation, the flow, and the operations of the entire SDLC. And this is where you'd be implementing the tools created by platform engineers. Like when you earlier in the day, when you're a platform engineer and you made a shareable GitHub action, later in the day, you need to implement that for one of your repos. And that implementation is the operations part of like when and how and why am I going to run this action. And this is what I often call day one operations, where you're really designing stacks, designing the flows, and really getting into the operational aspect going forward. And then that leads into SRE, which is, in my vision here, everything's arguable here, but SRE is more like the day two operations. And like earlier in the day when you built your action, then you implement it. And then later on, as everything's ongoing, you're starting to more focus on health and scalability of applications and your discovery or your disaster recovery plans and your observability of all your applications. And that will look at ongoing optimization. And this is going to be a hybrid of like software engineering and DevOps engineering. I guess they're all hybrids in the end. Like we were joking around earlier that we could very much have like a very overcomplicated, convoluted diagram in the fifth dimension. And these three are kind of really at the core of DevOps, of what you'll be doing. But at the same time, it doesn't do the justice of, you could also overlap IT. You could very much overlap just software engineering and data science and ML ops and even project management to all Venn diagram into everything that can possibly be DevOps, right?
Yeah, well, if you had Scrum Master, you take it from 5 dimensions to 8 dimensions. Very easy.
Yeah, there's what I like about DevOps is it's an overlap of a lot of things. And one of the things that got me into DevOps was I was really into supply chain management in college. And then I wanted to translate that to technology. Turns out it's DevOps. And that's like that pin in the middle of a wheel that kind of covers everything in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very similar. I really like the me being a DevOps engineer, the day one part. We're DevOps. We're your day ones at the end. So.
Yeah, we get your project started, and then when you're finally done, we'll keep it maintained, right?
All right, let's go on to assessing your current project structure.
So before you start any large DevOps, SRE, platform engineering, anything, you really want to very focus on what your team is and how it's structured and where your knowledges are and what the skills of everybody in your team are. So one of the first things you're going to probably notice when you're starting out is, do you have a mono repo or you have a poly repo? It is, from experience, unlikely that a company is going to change from one to the other. So you kind of just look at, what do you have? What are you going to be working with, and work around that and make your decisions knowing that if you're all into poly repos, but you have a mono repo, you're going to have to change how you look at things. You're going to want to look at your team structure, like how your teams are defined. Like, are they based on roles or products? Different companies will structure that differently, right? Do you have a large team? Do you have a small team? Are you starting out as a department, or are you starting out as a very small company? And these different factors will all come into your decision making, and very much like looking at skill level of DevOps as well. Because you may just have a very, very good engineering team that doesn't really care about DevOps, and therefore you might want to be light on the DevOps so that you don't make it too difficult for a bunch of engineers that don't understand it, right? For example, that gets into like monolith, microservice, distributed, right? So with monolith apps, and this is sort of an evolution, and I actually heard about this idea from a AWS exec at a conference, but monoliths are very natural to start with. Like, let's say you have a couple of developers and you're very new. It's going to be easier to build as a monolith to get into the market faster and iterate faster on the development side. But as everything evolves, eventually the monolith may not be the best answer. And usually people start to break features out of that monolith to tame the monolith and keep it more maintainable, right? And that's when you start migrating into microservices. And then eventually, if you're around long enough and your company buys another company, gets a couple new product lines, gets a whole new team, you're going to start getting into distributed realm. And that can be almost like each time you start a new project in a distributed application, you're probably starting as a department or a new team or a new product. And then you're kind of going through that monolith to microservice question again. But the app itself is so large as a distributed system, nobody starts there. But yeah, so that's just kind of an evolution of applications, that don't be afraid of a monolith. It's a good thing in the beginning. But later on, it's kind of good to start merging out, branching, and then to know microservices are much heavier on the DevOps knowledge versus monoliths, much lighter on the DevOps and the infrastructure.
So I got a question about that. What about, so with AWS Lambda or other serverless resources, it's recommended to do the microservices route. So what would you recommend about that, getting started on Lambda, for example?
So over time, like as you go back in time, the monoliths were much more popular and the microservices were much less known about even, and the offerings were not quite there. So like the modern days in 2024 here, it is very much more possible to just start with microservices and not have a monolith. And whereas Lambda is one of those options. I still believe the monolith will do a lot of justice because it's just lower barrier to entry and you don't have to know as much about the cloud or DevOps. But at the same time, it's hard to ignore the fact that you can dang near run your app for free on Lambda, right? And that cost option, that cost benefit can be great for a new application. So it really comes down to that question, like I was saying, like analyzing your team and your structure, like how many of your developers are comfortable with the cloud? Are they comfortable with Lambda? Are they comfortable with the heavier DevOps flow? And if everybody's totally comfortable with it, why not start with Lambda? But at the same time, if none of your developers know what a Lambda is and they only know how to do monoliths, I would not recommend doing that, even if it sounds like a good idea, because you might end up seeing the costs in other areas, like technical debt, right? And there's also the factor that I always believe the monolith, as it grows and evolves, lets you see what would not like naturally be a microservice better than if you just start with microservices. It's a little bit hard and convoluted to say, I'm going to structure microservices like XYZ, right? When you have that monolith already, it's easier to like notice, hey, I'm going to take this feature out, right? But as I said, like the modern times, there is enough documentation now, enough help. It's very cost conscious. And if you're comfortable with the heavier DevOps flow, why not go microservices first, right?
Yeah, I wish I would have known this several months ago. I built 3 products, and being DevOps, like I've been on product teams where we were scaling Kubernetes up to thousands of nodes. We rebuilt our entire disaster recovery with infrastructure-as-code and all that. And me trying to focus on the development side, learning Python and getting half decent at it, it was a lot of cognitive overhead to have like separate repos for every single microservice. And like, it took a lot out of me. So even being a DevOps guy and having a lot of experience there, like I would have gone the monolith route. And, I think you pay for it in the end, one way or another. If you're trying to take advantage of the free tier, you're going to pay for that in some engineering time, managing those DevOps services. So yeah, I think the monolith would have been a great option for me. And I think that the next one, I will go that route. So
yeah, and one balancing trade-off you could look at is if you're really going the microservice route first and maybe using Lambdas and all, you could kind of balance the pros and cons by using a mono repo for all of your functions. And then you'll have like a repo, an app, and a code base that gives you the feel of a monolith application that's very easy to iterate on and build quickly on and just kind of expand and grow quickly. But then, because then you have all of the flow within one repo, and then you can just deploy easily from there. And it kind of lightens the load a little bit, right? And then later on, you can kind of do like monolith to microservice and start branching repos out of that mono repo later on when you start having more team, more people involved, more products, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I did give that a half earnest shot. And it was, I think it was a really good experience building an app, like all, doing every part of it, being primarily DevOps and building the app side. Like it was really cool to see the whole process. Maybe we ought to do like a workshop or something like that. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a solo team, so how does team structure play into all that?
Yeah, so the team structure is like, if you have a very small team, and there's only a few people, you're having a lot of microservices and a lot of repos is going to become a boon, especially if you don't have very specifically DevOps engineers to deal with all the nuances of cloud and CI CD and all, right? So if you have like just engineers, that's going to have a big difference on how you structure things versus, let's say, you're at a large company and you're starting a new product at a large company and you already have really good standards for microservices, let's say. Or you're just starting a new company and you have like a bunch of high-end engineers and DevOps engineers that know the works and they just want to go with microservices from the beginning and the end. Just from the beginning, right? So like knowing where your team is at and what they're comfortable with will do a lot. And putting your kind of ego aside of like what you want and then seeing what is right for my team.
Yeah, that sometimes is ego will be a good team killer for sure.
Yeah, it's always hard when you're just an engineer and you're trying to work with all this crazy DevOps stuff and pipelines. It's way over your head, and you're like, oh, this scares me, versus someone that's like really simplifying the DevOps. Because in the end, we're developer operations, right? We're supposed to be helping the devs.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole point is to focus on the product. We'll get into that a little more on the next slides, but yeah, it's interesting thinking about like, there's so much hate on monoliths, and really at the end of the day, like it's what works. It's what gets your product out the door, and you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot with tech debt or anything like that. But as long as you manage that, I think it'll be okay.
And from experience, companies that have really like mature monoliths that are trying to go to microservices, I have yet to see any company truly get rid of the monolith. It usually continues to stick around even when they go into a microservice architecture. And then the monolith kind of just scales down to there's this one monolith, maybe two, and then a whole bunch of microservices, right? And then it never truly goes away. And then eventually they tame that monolith and start iterating on it and actually being able to improve upon it now that it's smaller and more manageable because they took so much out of it into the microservices, right?
Yeah, so it was a tech debt problem all along then.
Yeah. You got once to tame the monolith. It's great. And I've seen plenty of times where like someone's microservice is someone else's monolith, so it gets subjective.
True, very, very true. Yeah, it's like if you're new to climbing mountains, one mountain's going to be very big, but somebody who's climbed Everest, like, oh, that's cute. So on the topic of free tier and how it'll catch you one way or another later on, we've got a fun meme. If you haven't seen it, this is one of my favorites. So pretty much me, this must be fun. So let's go on to common tasks in CI CD.
So in CI CD, there are very common tasks. There's kind of an ontological process of getting an app deployed or packaged. So pretty much every application, like very few don't have this step, is installing dependencies. Where, your npm install, your pip install, your bundle gems, right? And then once you're proved that they install all fine, you're going to want to do your audits on it, which is like npm audit or pip audit command. And then you have your security scans for SAST and all that with all these third-party tools like SNCC and all these other ones, CodeQL. They'll test to all vulnerabilities and make sure your packages are up to date. Like even Dependabot would be in this category. And then once you got a good install and you got good packages, you're going to want to now test your code and run your automated testing, which is one of the big steps of CI in the first place. And then once you've proven that it can be tested and you got good code, you're usually going to move on to packaging your artifact, which is compiling like your TypeScript to JavaScript or building Java to your jars, right? And that can also usually be done either on the side for like a library or something, or if you're doing it for a service, probably building an image, right? And then once you have your artifact, the next step is going to be publish that artifact to registry, like ECR, Docker Hub, NPM registry, PyPy. And then now, in that sense, you're kind of done with the CI part and you've got your artifact. And this is kind of a gray area, like publishing an artifact could be part of CD as well. Like if you have a library and you publish an artifact, that you're kind of deployed at that point, right? But now that you have your artifact published, the next step is the CD part, right? And now you want to start deploying your artifact into some environment where further testing is probably going to happen, like QA testing or functional testing or more automated testing, and even manual configurations, and then you're moving through these environments, each one up until deploying to prod. And then you have those, and then that's all part of the CD process as well. And that's where it kind of gets muddied, whether if you deployed staging and then run automated tests on staging, kind of did a CD and then moved into CI, and now you're back to CD going into prod, right? So as I said before, like the whole CI CD thing is about what you're doing, not the tools you're using. It's just kind of, are you deploying? And there's an environment involved and rules around that environment and rules on how to extend, like kind of move on from that environment to another higher one, right? So how do you move from dev to stage to prod?
Enough to make your head spin. Awesome. Well, next up, we've got best practices and alternatives to custom solutions.
Yeah, so when it comes to building your own custom solutions, you have to remember, like, DevOps can get really arbitrary and real quick, and it is pretty difficult. So do know there will be times you will have to be doing custom stuff. And you want to know, like, how custom do you really need to be? And you want to do your due diligence on this subject. And this is really that build versus buy question before you start building or implementing anything. And obviously, when I say buy, you don't always have to spend money. It might also be buy a free open source package from the GitHub marketplace, right? But just like even in code, right? You want to make sure that before you go write a whole bunch of code, you want to do your due diligence and make sure that there isn't some package off the shelf that just so happens to do what you are needing to do. Because you want to really identify, what do I need to do custom and what doesn't really need to be custom because what you're doing isn't that unique. For example, those previous steps I just showed, there's a lot of common steps. Lots of people have built an image. So you don't really need to write a custom image builder script. There is pretty much always something off the shelf that'll build your image just fine. And then you're going to find out that the custom part is how you do the tags, right? Logging into ECR, covered. Logging into Amazon, covered. All these steps are all covered. But then most of the time, the custom is what tags you have. And that's what you want to focus on, right? Is getting your custom part right so you get your tags right. And then just feeding that into some off-the-shelf tool. So you want to be careful with over customizing your CI CD flows and really look for the best marketplace solutions. So go hit that GitHub Actions marketplace. Go look at GitLab components. Bitbucket Pipelines has tons of tools off the shelf. Even if you're building like a Helm chart or using the, like with Helm, I oftentimes use the Bitnami Commons library though. So I don't have to do as much Helm. And then also just making sure that are there Terraform pieces you can use, right? And just off-the-shelf modules before you go, once again, have to add a bunch of technical debt that makes everything more complicated just because there's more code, right?
Yeah, definitely. And before we keep going, what current tools are you using right now, and what I guess off-the-shelf solutions, free solutions are you using? And on the other hand, what pains are you currently seeing in your DevOps processes, in your pipelines and stuff? And this goes for YouTube. If you're watching a replay on YouTube, hit us down in the comments. See if we can get a discussion going and figure some things out with you. But yeah, we'd love to see in the chat. Let's hear about what you're using, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, maybe some horror stories of over customizing and then having that realization. I could go from that much code to this much code by simply using a couple of GitHub Actions correctly, right?
Yeah, I love a good horror story, and especially, Halloween's coming up. So hit us with your scary stories. I had a manager on the idea of diminishing the amount of code that you have and, reducing tech debt, going back to that idea, he was adamant that we have as little code as possible. So whether that was a Helm chart, we would just fill out the absolute bare minimum, the values, and use the Helm chart off the shelf. Or if we were using an open source repo, we weren't forking it and customizing it. We were using it as is with as few customizations as possible, because otherwise that's now a pet that you have to take care of and groom and brush and bathe and blow dry and feed, where, the idea is that we want cattle. We want to be able to focus on what the dev team is good at. What's your product? You don't want to be spending your time spinning your wheels on like, oh, I wrote this really cool bash script that nobody's ever going to be able to read ever again. Not even me. So you want to avoid that. And I thought that was a really, really good idea. As much as like we want to tweak things and customize things, like don't dig yourself into a hole with it. So, focus on what you do best.
Yeah, and to know, like, you want to put as much time as you can into what you know needs to be custom. Because the more custom pipelines you write, the less time you're going to have to deal with the difficult parts that probably do need some TLC and custom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the less you're going to want to, because you've already spent your cognitive energy on things that don't matter as much. So
yeah.
All right. And that brings us to building versus buying and the new cool kid on the block, platform engineering.
Yeah. So this is plays into what we were just talking about. The benefits here is you're going to abstract that complexity and have other people manage that complexity in those actions and modules and whatever off-the-shelf thing you took. If it's a popular enough tool and you've done your due diligence, it will most likely enforce best practices and the guardrails that you're looking for, as well as giving a better DevOps experience. And you're offloading all of that details, you're getting faster time to market, and you're also going to get built-in compliance and security with patches coming on the regular without you even having to touch it. And all you have to do is make sure that you have the up-to-date version, and you don't have to worry about how you actually patched something to make it secure. And some other really smart person on a very popular project did, and you just bump a version, right? And a lot of these tools, especially if you actually pay for something, will have 24/7 support with subject matter experts that can really dig in and help you when you're in a time of need. Because once again, the more custom, the more it's on you, and the less people you're going to be able to call upon when the going gets rough.
Yeah, and it definitely will at some point.
Yeah, it looks easy, but if it was, I wouldn't have a job, right?
Yeah, well, Kelly definitely makes it look easy. And just a quick shout out, DuploCloud is a platform in that sense. So, hit us up on LinkedIn, either me or Kelly, or, hit us up in the comments and see what we can do to help. So we're here to help. And even if we're not the right fit, there are other platforms out there, but it is the cool new thing out there. So, and I'm excited for it. It's, I like this trend.
Yep.
So on to our recap. That takes us to the end of our webinar today, except for the questions at the end. So get your questions ready. What are the things that we want everyone to take away from this webinar?
So when you do CI CD done right, and you really do that due diligence and focus on simplicity and having a streamlined process, it will be fast, and it will streamline your developers, and they will be happy that they have you. And just like Duplo, as we said, is a strong ecosystem. Even if you don't choose Duplo, you got to pick a strong ecosystem and stick with it. Sticking with those ecosystems, you're going to have a lot more of a clear road and a roadmap to get to a working system, right? And the more you pick and choose and try to string ecosystem tools together, the more complicated it gets. Like, for example, if you use GitHub, it's easiest to just use GitHub Actions and GitHub Issues, and you can really buy into that ecosystem. Or when you're using Duplo, we have a bunch of actions, and we have our tool. And when you step out of that, it starts kind of getting out of the boundaries and making things difficult again, right? And that goes with any ecosystem, that it actually does make it a lot faster to just buy into the tools. Even if some other tool is so much better than the same tool in the ecosystem you have, it just kind of keeps everything together and simple and focused and easy to pay attention to. And my last takeaway is that DevOps will punch, and it will punch hard, and you got to roll with those punches and have fun with it too.
Yeah, definitely. So it's just try not to go for the shiny new toys, like, ooh, shiny toy. You know,
yeah,
what is good.
Changing tools a lot. Well, that's a punch. Yeah, if you're trying to keep moving from this one to this one to this one, that definitely slows things down and makes things complicated.
Yeah,
so just rolling with the punches that something gives you, right?
Well, yeah, at that point, you know, don't be punching yourself. DevOps is going to punch you hard enough as it is. So don't punch yourself with too much work, you know, too much customization, too much switching tools. So
yeah. Well, hopefully that was informative and good talking to you all.
Yeah, before you go, we've got our next what are these even called? Webinars. We've got our next webinar on compliance. Not the most exciting topic in my experience, but a very important one. And Venkat is extremely knowledgeable on this subject. You know, he founded this company and he's our CEO. So, you know, I definitely won't be falling asleep.
Oh, compliance. It's fun.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and it's not all about audits. It's about building it right from the beginning, right?
Yeah, making sure you have a very safe and secure application and quality. So like compliance really does help bring quality, kind of forced quality into your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you build it right from the beginning, then compliance isn't a big deal. So exactly. It's a lot easier. So on to the Q&A. Let's hear your questions in the chat or in the little Q&A box on the side. What questions do we all have? I know I've probably got a few. So Kelly, what's your biggest horror story from I'm on compliance now. What's your biggest CI CD horror story? Well, let's have some Halloween time.
Not having a check on making sure that what I'm about to run and deploy is going to the right environment and being scoped. Luckily, I accidentally did the prod into the dev environment and broke the dev, so it wasn't as horrifying as it could be, but that's a situation I'll never forget, and I had a lot of developers mad at me for that. And from then on, I realized you want to make sure that when you run something and you run for prod or run for dev, there's some check that makes sure that your credentials are for the right environment.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're foolproofing things against yourself for sure. You know, your coffee might be a little off one day, and yeah, it's like in construction: measure twice, cut once. Whatever our equivalent that is. Awesome. Well, no questions from the chat. So once again, thank you very much for being here. We will see you at the next webinar, and hit us up on LinkedIn and anywhere else.
Cool. Good to talk to everybody. See you later. Have a great day.
Peace out.